I'm super excited to get the opportunity to speak to you both about your project, Grito Viejo, Viejito or Vie. How do I pronounce that? It's Grito Viejito, see?
Yeah, Gerardo, do you want to say what it is, or do you want me to
Well,
continue?
the overall project is called Grito Viejito. We are at gritoviejito.org. And our first project is uh, Viejito Enfermito Grito.
Okay. Wow. And I'm curious how this collaboration came together between the two of you and the process of getting this video together, what the inspiration was. So I guess first let's go ahead and just start from how you know one another and decided to work on this project to start out with.
Okay. Well, I met Gerardo in the early 90s in San Francisco. So we both have deep Bay Area roots, and I would say that's where I became an artist. At the time that I met him, we were all part of just the various arts and culture, Latino arts and culture scene in the Mission District. And some institutions that we were connected with included Galeria de la Raza and Artist Television Access. But I believe central to our formative way of thinking in terms of HIV cultural work was an organization called Proyecto contra la vida por SIDA. And Project Against AIDS for what was it? Proyecto contra SIDA por vida, a Project Against AIDS for Life. And part of what they wanted to, it was, to do a harm reduction, safer sex education, early 90s, to stop the spread of HIV, but through sex positive kind of projects, and arts and culture were really central to that. And so Gerardo, I don't know if that's technically where we met, or if you also wanted to pick up on.
No, well, I was working in the social services as well, working at a place called Guerrero House, and basically it was a place for new adults to find a home, coming out of the streets, coming out from many different places from the world, because San Francisco attracts people from all over the world, but they don't always land here with money or a place to go. And so, we worked with a lot of people that were doing street work, and a lot of HIV positive young men and a few women and some trans. And so the populations are similar. But our main connection is through Galeria de la Raza.
Got it. Got it.
And then in the process of getting to know each other over the years, working on different projects and things, how did this particular project film come about?
Sure. Well, I had known, like I said, Hedda for a very long time. We had never directly worked with each other, I don't believe. We were in very similar circles. We were friends, but as far as actual creative work together, the thing that was really central to my dynamic, my relationship to Gerardo, was actually, surprise, he was really the only HIV positive person I knew at the time. This probably was still a time when HIV status was still seen, I think, for among many people, even in San Francisco, something to be shameful of, particularly in perhaps like Latinx communities. And we were young. It was like the 90s. I was probably in my early 20s, and I was coming fresh out of a very fresh memory of losing my cousin, my 27-year-old cousin, to AIDS in 1988. And in retrospect, it was a really formative experience for me. And we didn't know much of each other. He was kind of this mysterious cousin who went off to New York. I was 17 and he was 27. And at that point, he was the only person who had died from AIDS. But it was very formative in my sense of self as a young queer person who was in the closet, and kind of connecting everything that was about, just like all of the trauma, all of the shame. And in particular, so this is a bit of a long story, but it kind of will, I think, contextualize how Gerardo came into the Grito Viejito project, was that the name of Grito Viejito, the idea of using the dance of the old men, of a folkloric dance from Mexico, was something that came to me because it is a dance that is performed in Mexico and in Mexican American communities with young people, young bodies, acting like old people. They do exaggerated movements of old people. They hunch over, they walk with a cane, and these dancers would always appear in parades because, like I had said earlier, I had grown up on the border in Brownsville, Texas, and every year we would have a bicultural celebration called Charo Days, and you would see these little kids dressed up as old men, you know, dancing, coming up the street. And as a child, they always terrified me because there was something very uncanny about like young bodies acting old. And so if you flash forward to witnessing my cousin, you know, who had come down for a visit in 1985, I believe. He was at the time 25 years old, and he was walking with a cane. And it was something that really struck me as like, what's going on? He looks sick, you know, he's so young, but yet he's basically like an old man. And, you know, sure enough, like my family member said, yes, you know, he does have AIDS. And so, but it was very kind of like whispered and quiet and sort of like, you know, he just has, you know, spurs, or, you know, until we finally, like, you know, we're told, you know, told the truth. And so I think that reflecting back on this really traumatic experience, and later on wanting to revisit it in a film project that I was doing about growing up and coming out in the 1980s, I knew that I wanted to have a scene with a man who has AIDS, like dancing, kind of becoming old before his time. And immediately, like, my thought went to Herido. I think he's so iconic in terms of his performance abilities, his spirituality, that he is from Michoacan, which is where the town continues. And so we originally started having conversation about this, I think, when, Herido, like in 2019 or 18 even, or very, very early in the process, that I'd really like him to be kind of the actor for this particular scene. That was a feature-length film that's still in development. And over the course of developing it, what I realized was that this particular scene was very powerful, and what I wanted it to do and function, it was something that couldn't just exist within the film. It had to be taken out and be its own thing. And through that, I then, you know, began to talk with Gerardo about actually just us making some sort of like collaborative work around this idea of the dance of the old man. I think making some kind of, I think we were going to make a film originally, or we were going to film you, or we were going to explore what it was, you know, to reinterpret this dance from this lens of HIV/AIDS and illness and health and memory. And by great timing and great, you know, we applied very early in the formation of our collective. You know, we always want more people to join us, but at the moment we're sort of like a duo. We applied for a grant from Visual Aids for a video commission for Day Without Art. And they really liked our idea, and they liked the concept. And so that really launched us into kind of like, that was the catalyst that actually allowed us to then move forward to create our first film project, which was called Viejito, Enfermito, Grito, Old Man, Sick Man, Shout. And Gerardo, I don't know if you want to kind of continue the story from there.
Yeah, well, for me, it was a process of. I mean, I was honored to have Delisa consider me for a collaboration, and I had seen some of her work before and was impressed by what she had done. Although her work was very different from what I was doing, I still saw the quality in her work, and so when she proposed the project to me, I immediately understood that we both did, that we were taking on something that is culturally specific to the Purépecha people from Michoacán, Mexico. That's where the dance comes from. And it was necessary for us to do a lot of research. So to some degree, the organization is research-based, a creative project where we explore how to honor the different iterations of what the dance has been, because the dance has evolved from what it was before Europeans came to Mexico. It was a dance done by the elders, the five elders, one of which would be the shaman of the village, and it was during a specific time to commune with spirit and get insight, perhaps a little bit of prayer for the harvest. And it evolved into other dances because they were not allowed to do their traditional dances anymore once the battle against the Aztecs was done, and the Purecha people had joined, as well as many other tribes had joined the Spaniards in defeating them. They lost everything. They lost all their treasures, all their everything that they had was taken from them. They were conquered, but they were stripped and not allowed to do some of their ceremonial things. And so it became a different dance. It became a dance of sorrow. And then that is a way that they express their sorrow for having lost so much. But eventually, I guess they got to know the Spaniards better, and they saw that they were kind of weak, and so the dance became a little bit more about, wearing a white mask to represent the Spaniards, and showing how frail they are, how weak they are, how easily they get sick and die. They didn't seem to have the same kind of resilience as the natives did, and so it became a sort of a dance of mockery, and that's kind of what it is now. But for our purposes, we needed it to. I needed to find a way to utilize the dance and communicate aspects of being HIV positive that perhaps are not as well known, as well as to highlight the dance, and also to look at some of the spiritual aspects behind it, and not just what everybody is familiar with now. So that became very important to understand the place that it had, but then in the process, it became necessary to, as with many of my projects, becomes necessary to create a unique language using movement and sound and pantomime and poetry to express that which is beyond words. And that was basically the goal for me as an artist. And I think that David shares in that as well.
The expression of things that are beyond the ability to say, I think, is really an interesting perspective to take on a sort of traditional dance and bring it back into the contemporary realm as well. Can we talk a little bit about the context of HIV/AIDS and this ideal of the things that we don't see and how that translates into the dance itself?
Well, some of the things that we don't see are aspects of having HIV for a long time. Much of the focus of these days in terms of HIV services is geared towards youth and prevention, and it has felt for a very long time, decade or even longer, probably longer, maybe a couple decades, that it seems that people in general are somewhat tired of hearing about AIDS, tired of hearing about, it was a heavy thing, and society carried it in whatever way they could. But people didn't really want to hear about it. And I think that when we talk about a lot of sensitive issues, in general, as humans, we tend to have categories for where to place subject matter, where to place the words that somebody's bringing. And if we don't begin with a statement, we don't begin with something that can be categorized. We're starting with the dance, and the dance is meant also unofficially, it's meant to relax the viewer and sort of let them be open to just enjoying a film of somebody dancing, and then suddenly you see the effect. One of the effects being breathing issues that I had and still have to some degree. And so for me, it was important to highlight what long-term survivors of HIV have been going through, that many times doctors are not aware of. We're still the ones educating doctors. At least I feel that I am. When I have a new medical issue, I research it, and then I come to my doctor and I tell him, I believe I have this diagnosis. these are my symptoms. This is why I think I had it, and this is what I think is a proper treatment for it. And my doctor will look at it, and 90% of the time he'll say, yes, you're right, and let's go ahead and go through with that. So there are a lot of other issues that people don't consider, like joint issues. And for example, if you lose all of your fat, then that is lubricant for your body. What is your body grinding up against, right? What is supporting the joints, the ligaments, all of that. And so it's been a really long process of educating doctors, but I only have my doctor,
Right.
my specialist. And so I thought it was important to look at things that are not generally looked at.
Sure.
In terms of HIV and AIDS.
What were the things that you were most concerned about, and how you were presenting this story?
Sure, definitely. Well, I worked with a cinematographer. My role in this project was as the producer director and script writer and sound designer and editor. So at least from like the sort of the whole kind of production and post-production side, we were a very small crew, but in terms of kind of the general arc of the film and the 3 acts and kind of where we wanted to start and where we wanted to end, a lot of that was sort of spearheaded by me and then further developed with the input of Herido, right? And so the way we build ourselves in this first project was like I would take the lead in terms of like some of the artistic choices, and so I'd be like director, and then he would be like collaborator, and then the next project, then I'm going to follow his lead and a lot of his creative vision. I'll be so we're very excited to be moving into like that next stage, in the coming year, and so I think what was important for me was really making sure that I come from experimental documentary, and so this really is like a document. It is a document of this man and his body and his spirit and sort of his story of where he started, how HIV made him an old man before his time, and the various kind of impact that the illnesses, not just like the long term, like the illness themselves, but the medications, like how they made them old, right? I mean, that's one thing you find very specific to long-term survivors, is that like this was before PrEP and a lot of these other sort of like the what's it called, like ART therapy. There's a whole other different way of relating to illness and health and long-term health now than there would be, say, someone who was just newly diagnosed. In lots of ways, just as like Herido was needs to still educate his doctors, like I needed to be educated, because it's true, like people really don't talk about AIDS that much, but I found myself in this kind of like suspended space of time of still like having this trauma of remembering my cousin in the hospital, and yet the world had moved on and medicine had moved on, but it really wasn't on my radar. So through many conversations that I had with Herido, all documented, because that's crucial to our practice, is that every single thing is documented, because again, that allows, as part of the research, that allows future collaborators to come in and kind of see what we've been doing. Through all of that, like I recognized that we needed to find a visual language to then articulate like what it is that he was going through. And so his movements, his dance, we workshopped it. He I took a lot of transcripts from what he had talked about, and like the idea of the pantomime, that many people really respond to that piece where he's like moving, like taking medicines and wiping them away because they don't work. That was something that we really wanted to function. And then also the other thing that for me was very critical was like the motif of the cane. Because in this dance, there's they dance with the cane, right? And it's a solo performance in the film, but the dance is danced, like Herido said, with 5 people, right? And there's a moment where they lock canes and they kind of all move as one, right? It's like this train. And I'm really interested in this kind of notion of like the canes locking together, because it can be such a metaphor for so many things in terms of like how HIV is transmitted, how we join in solidarity, how this work and this practice, which is really a social practice, and it's my first time as an artist working specifically in like socially oriented work, kind of like how we use our film and our art and the performances like to spark dialogue, similar to what we are doing today. The images that come out of this are meant to represent, you know, public health messages, such as the U equals U, which is embroidered on his outfit as the character of the Grito, which is the shaman healer character at the very end. So Herido sort of conceptually, he occupies three spaces throughout, you know, the arc of the dance. He's the old man, you know, he's dancing the traditional dance. For those who've never seen it, they get to experience that. Then he's changed into the enfermito, the sick man, and we go through his struggles. And then through his spirituality and his strength, he then becomes the Grito, the community, you know, the wounded healer, right? And that I'm particularly proud of, because a lot of it was filmed verite, where he really is just, the camera is just captured, you know, from cinematography. We just put it on a tripod and just captured it in real time without any rehearsal, an actual sort of ritual where he gathers the energy and prepares to kind of present it back to the audience. And so those were kind of some highlights that I wanted to present, as we include poetic voiceover that he developed, and just many other elements to kind of bring you through this experience.
Really interested in this idea of the wounded healer and how that transforms the sort of cultural perspective of a person living with AIDS. Can we talk a little bit about that? Geraldo, would you mind starting the conversation on that idea?
Yeah. That whole aspect that involves the spiritual life, and I needed to represent that, but I needed everything in the film to be authentic. It's not meant to be performative. It's not meant to be a show. It's meant to open a window into my life, into my spiritual life and my practice. And I guess that for when I was growing up, I always had this sense that you know, my life had purpose. And when I realized that I was gay, I realized, well, that eliminates a lot of what I thought my purpose was. You know, like to have a large family and sort of train them to be healers of the world, and sort of what my mother did with us. I'm the last of 10. And so many of us are out there doing community work and, you know, in various capacities. But as far as the wounded healer, I believe that HIV and AIDS, for me, became a kind of tool to use to develop myself. I always knew growing up that it would take something extraordinarily difficult for me to rise to the occasion, to me to grow enough to be able to share this sort of experience with people. And so in the first years of being HIV positive, you know, it was the early 90s. There were no medicines at the beginning. And we were, you know, basically told a year, 6 months, 3 years. And I took that and I said, okay, well, if it's gonna, you know, the more active I am, the more I spend my time doing creative projects, the longer I'm gonna live. If, you know, if I'm sitting at home all stressed out, that's not gonna help my health at all. And so I took it from the very beginning and utilized it as a tool to.
Sure.
Mm-hmm. And I also think the wounded healer, actually, you know, I refer to that because even before we got the commission from Visual Aids, when we started off that year, I said, okay, I would love for us to have a theme this year for Grito Viejito year 1. And I think I would propose that we call it, you know, queer world mending and the wounded healer. And that it's like we come from, as queer people, like we do come from this sort of wound, and we need to heal ourselves, like, and often it is through like art or from like through community building and practices of care. And it's sort of that idea that you come from this place of trauma and hurt, and then you do something with it and continue. And so the idea of queer world mending and being a wounded healer, that really fit in really nicely. And I'm very happy to see how the project has evolved. And I think And for me, you know, I never had an opportunity to have this conversation with my cousin who died. You know, I'm pretty sure he knew I was queer. It's a story I tell very rarely to people, but I only saw him once in the hospital, and he looked at me and said, you're very beautiful, you know. And no one had really talked to me that way in terms of like acknowledging, like, you know, I thought I was ugly because I was gay, and these were the messages you got from society. And so I think like hearing that message of affirmation was really important. And he's still a mystery, and I'm still trying to learn a lot about who he was from people who hopefully will be able to talk about him. I think it's very painful because of just the way that he died. But again, I never had an opportunity to know who he was, or to even have these conversations with him. And then when I met Herido just a few years later, and I found out he was, you know, I learned that he was HIV positive, I was so convinced I was going to lose him. I mean, he was, you know, a dear friend, and I just had so much fear still that he would be gone, right? And so I think that there's really something to be said that here we are in like, you know, 2024, and we're both, you know, in our 50s, and we are aging, and you know, I'm aging in a different way from the way Herido has aged, but that we have this ability to be reflective and to look back and to understand that it's like those stories still need to be documented, they still need to be told. That time period needs to be remembered, and working with youth is really important. And, you know, thinking about like, how do we use the old man figure, you know, to talk about queer futures, right? And also, how do we use that old man figure to acknowledge the realities of older people living with HIV today? And how do we also create those spaces that allow for that kind of intergenerational, you know, dialogue, and like ideas of like, you know, elders and stories and oral histories and stuff, because we lost so much. And I never had that role model. I mean, the only role model, like I said, it was filled with this idea of like shame and silence. And so I don't want that to happen with like, now that I'm in that position, you know, being the older person, I don't want that to happen. So this idea of like the wounded healer, it definitely means something very specific to Herido, and it also means something very specific to me. And I think together that's what we're bringing to the project. And we really look forward to the time when additional people are moved and want to join and start generating additional art in conversation with us.
And Geraldo, I'd like to focus for one moment on the idea of what it means to actually have survived and to have thrived with HIV/AIDS for so many years, and how that has evolved your perspective on the queer community throughout the years, and what you see moving forward for the queer community.
Well, I feel like we've all sort of seen evolution or cycles of generations that are experiencing gay life in very different ways. And so I feel like obviously the young people are not as aware of a lot of these things. And for me, the focus wasn't so much on that as much as speaking of illness as a universal aspect of living in the world. And the theme from World AIDS Day that year was "Everyone I Know is Sick." And so that informed the messaging that I was putting behind it, because I felt that, well, in terms of the wounded healers, back to that, I'm openly sharing with people, this is my illness, and I am here and capable, leaving it open and a sort of open invitation to other people. I've had people with other illnesses, cancers, women, young women, that have come and said, I saw your film and it looked like you were telling my life story. They are not queer, they don't have AIDS. And so I think that though your question is very specific about the gay community, for me, the artwork that I put out into the world has always been, my mission has always been to to speak about universal truths. And so that is why I avoided language in the film. And so as far as where we're going as a queer community, it's difficult for me to say because to some degree I have pulled myself back a bit. I have been practicing celibacy now for going on 11 years. And, that does kind of put you away from a lot of what's going on out there. But I do feel that there are many ways in which the medical community is trying to educate people around some of the issues. We were at the National Latino Conference on HIV, HCV, and SUD, and one of the presenters was talking about older people living with AIDS and how the medical community is not applying geriatric medicine along with HIV medicine, that they're being seen as separate things, and that there has for a long time now been a need to join the two areas together, because that's what, with AIDS, we are dealing with somewhat geriatric issues. And so I kind of feel that the education of the younger people, it's not just about what we went through, but it's about showing possibilities, because I think the more social media comes into our realm, the more isolated people are becoming. The youth, I feel, don't have the stepping stones to mature in their gayness, in their life. And so I feel that with this new approach of the medical community kind of starting with this year, bringing that information out more to the world, that in fact, there are a lot of people that have been living with HIV for a very long time. And we have a lot to contribute. We're a whole generation whose voice was somewhat cut off. And so how do you represent that important generation that fills the gap between, the sort of blossoming 70s of sexuality with the taboo of the 90s, and where we are now, to bring a little bit of understanding of how that all comes. There's a lot of work that still needs to be done. And
well, and we're in a similar generation. I think when we were the younger generation, we didn't have the generation in front of us to sort of hand that baton off to us, because of what was happening within the community, and the emphasis was so much on prevention and the maintenance of the people that were in our lives who were disappearing so rapidly, particularly within the arts community. It was quite devastating. And there's an entire generation, 2 generations of artists and healers and leaders that just disappeared from the scene. So it was kind of a triage, particularly in the late 80s, early 90s. It was just, trying to figure out how to survive and shift to the perspective of the disease, which had been emphasized during the 80s so much on the gay community as a gay cancer, a gay disease. And of course, that was proven wrong rather rapidly, but continues to be a little bit of an emphasis as well. So I think the work that you're both doing here is very, very important, and offering a unique context. I love the lens through which you show it, literally and figuratively, by using that dance with such a rich history. What are the next phases? Because you referred to first year, second year. Can you tell us what to expect from the project moving forward?
Yes. Well, to begin with, since it's sort of now my turn to develop a project and have Dalisa's support, we have applied for some. Whoops, thing came off. We have applied for another grant, and the basic grant is for a portal, an interactive portal called the Portal of Silence. And the idea being that a viewer would come to the site, and there would be various stages that the person participates in, leading up to different pathways within the structure of the portal. And at the end of each tunnel passageway, the viewer sees a short film at the end of it. And that short film would be done in a similar way, or completely different, but with the idea that using general communication, standard communication, to not use it, to continue developing languages that speak to people at the guttural level, at the soul, and not be trapped by the mind. Much of what the film is about silencing the mind. And in the film, I talk about dying in order to be present to all that surrounds you, and it's something that's seen in all religious practices throughout the world. All of the sort of monks and Buddhists and Sufi, they all develop poetry because they cannot describe the eternal in words. Anything descriptive is not the object, it's a description, and our mind only functions in description. And so one of the big goals in the film was to bring people out of their mechanical mental processes and sort of land deeper within them, with this new sort of physical messaging. So I think maybe that's not the question you were asking, but
I think it's helpful to understand that the project is an evolution and it's a continuing dialogue. And while your experience and voice is really important, the interpretation of that, of the original video and the things that are to come, are really about a dialogue, and fit really well within the theme of the ephemeral show, because the perception of HIV/AIDS and the battlefields that we sort of choose to fight on are all evolving. So just because we have a classification of drugs which are preventative and sustaining to those with HIV, doesn't mean that we're done at all. And there's a ton of evidence to prove that as well.
Right. And the idea that the videos and the documentation then just becomes sort of, maybe a behind the scenes of Herido. The one idea is that he does puppetry. I'm really interested in that idea of as he repairs his old puppets, what does that look like? Or when he goes and engages with members of the Buddha Pecha community, perhaps, right? Because he has ancestry that's Buddha Pecha. So it's very like all encompassing, and it's beautiful because it really allows so many points of entry to talk about these issues. And at every stage of the way, it is a sort of like a very fertile ground for, like, you've got the video documentation. Some may be very rough, some may be very polished. And so you follow that story, and ideally, you are encouraged to create your own media too, or also in conversation and in partnership, create additional, like, some of those videos might turn into an installation at some point. So it's kind of right now, we have so many points, and it's pretty exciting to see how it's growing. Yeah.
Well, I think that's the joy of creativity, is that it's a spark. It starts something, and then with a little bit of momentum, it manages to take on a life of its own and become important to so many people. And that's why it's important to tell these stories and to be, screen, to use the languages of our past to develop something for the future. And I'm particularly moved by this project in the video, and I hope that you continue to have success and find more ways to fund the work and be even more visible, which is extremely important in a very youth-centered culture, particularly within the queer sphere. We see it's like a Instagram promo or something of what the queer identity, LGBTQIA plus plus is, but I particularly prefer the word queer because it opens it up to a realm of identities that aren't just about, maybe sex or body or, the sort of standardized languages that we use within queer identity and art specifically. So I appreciate you guys taking the time to speak with me about this today. And I'm super excited to see the response of our audience here in Mexico City. And of course, as we progress forward and helping to support the project for more visibility. So